Hi guys, welcome to today's episode of Success Talks Football. On this episode, we'll discuss on the just concluded UEFA Champions League quarterfinals and also the weekend games from the top 5 leagues. So stay with me. On Tuesday, 15th April, Aston Villa hosted PSG at the Villa Park and won the match with 3 goals while PSG had 2 goals. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough to take them to the semi-finals because on aggregate, PSG had 5 goals while they had 4 goals. You know, if only Asensio utilized the last chance they got to get an equalizer, who knows what could have happened at the extra time. But it is what it is. However, I want to say well done to Aston Villa for playing a good game in their own home. But that wasn't enough to take them to the semi-final. So congratulations to PSG for qualifying to the semi-finals. That same day, Dortmund hosted Barcelona at the Signal Iduna Park and won with 3 goals while Barcelona had 1 goal, but unfortunately it wasn't enough to take them to the semi-finals because on aggregate it was 5-3. You know, if they had played this way, at the Camp Nou, it could have been a different story, and maybe, just maybe, the one of the favorites of this year's competition could have been, you know, eliminated, but that didn't happen. Barcelona qualified to the semi-finals while Dortmund got disqualified, but again, well done to them for playing a beautiful game in their own home. And on Wednesday, 16th April, Inter Milan hosted Bayern Munich at the San Siro, and it was a 2-2 draw, but this was enough to qualify them to the semi-finals because they won the first leg of the competition. And so on aggregate, it was 4 to Inter Milan and 3 to Bayern Munich. This was rather unfortunate for Bayern Munich, who did everything to get the first goal and even an equalizer, but it wasn't enough to take them to the semi-finals. And also it was disappointing for Thomas Muller, who I feel he has just played his last Champions League with Bayern Munich. So it wasn't a good day for them, but then it is what it is. And like I said, Inter Milan is the underdog of this year's competition, and look at, they've just qualified to the semi-finals again, and who knows, they might just win this year's trophy. It is what we have to look out for. That same day, Real Madrid hosted Arsenal at the Santiago Bernabeu, but unfortunately they recorded a loss. That was rather unfortunate. You know, it was 2 to Arsenal and 1 to Real Madrid, and on aggregate it was 5 to Arsenal and 1 to Real Madrid. You know, that was disgraceful for the defending champions. You know, it was sort of expected because the team have not been informed, but then given the team's historical precedence and experience, we expected a comeback, but that was just not enough. And Arsenal came prepared for whatever Real Madrid had to offer. You know, they played really well, and that got them to the semi-finals. So congratulations to Arsenal for qualifying to the semi-finals. For the semi-finals, it is Arsenal versus PSG at the Emirates Stadium on the 29th of April. And on the 30th of April, it is Barcelona versus Inter Milan at the Camp Nou. Then for the second leg, on 6th May, it is Inter Milan versus Barcelona at the San Siro. Then on the 7th, it is PSG versus Arsenal at the Parc des Princes Stadium. These are the fixtures for the semi-finals. Now to the weekend games fixtures from the top 5 leagues. In the Premier League on Wednesday, April 19th, Newcastle hosted Crystal Palace. This was the outstanding match, and Newcastle destroyed Crystal Palace to 5-0. And on Saturday, April 19th, we have 4 matches scheduled for 3 p.m. and they are Brentford versus Brighton, Crystal Palace versus Bournemouth, Everton versus Manchester City, West Ham versus Southampton, and at 5:30 it will be Aston Villa versus Newcastle. Then on Sunday, April 20, it will be 3 matches are scheduled for 2 p.m. and they are Fulham versus Chelsea, Ipswich Town versus Arsenal, Manchester United versus Wolves, and at 4:30 it will be Leicester City versus Liverpool. And on Monday, April 21, it will be Tottenham versus Nottingham Forest at 8 p.m. West African time. In La Liga, on Friday, April 18th, Espanyol will go head-to-head with Getafe at 8 p.m. And on Saturday, April 19th, it will be Rayo Vallecano versus Valencia at 1 p.m. And at 3:15 p.m., it will be Barcelona versus Celta Vigo. And 5:30 p.m., it will be Mallorca versus Leganés. And the last match for that day will be Las Palmas versus Atletico Madrid at 8 p.m. And on Sunday, April 20th, it will be Real Valladolid versus Osasuna at 1 p.m. And at 3:15 p.m. it will be Villarreal versus Real Sociedad, and at 5:30 p.m. it will be Sevilla versus Alaves, and the last match for that day will be Real Madrid versus Athletic Bilbao at 8 p.m. And on Monday, April 21, it will be just one match, which will be Girona versus Real Betis at 8 p.m. In Serie A, on Saturday, April 19th, it is Ligue versus Como at 2 p.m. and at 5 p.m. it is Monza versus Napoli, and at 7:45 p.m. the last match for that day will be AS Roma versus Verona. And on Sunday, April 20th, it will be Empoli versus Venezia at 2 p.m. and at 5 p.m. Bologna will host Inter, and the last match for that day will be AC Milan versus Atalanta at 7:45 p.m. And on Monday, April 21, would have Torino host Udinese at 11:30 a.m. and at 2 p.m. to be Cagliari versus Fiorentina, and at 5 p.m. it will be Genoa versus Lazio, and the last match for that day will be Parma versus Juventus at 7:45 p.m. In the Bundesliga, on Saturday, April 19th, 5 matches are scheduled for 2:30 p.m. They are Heidenheim versus Bayern Munich, Freiburg versus Hoffenheim, Mainz versus Wolfsburg, Leipzig versus Austin Kiel, Werder versus Bochum, and the last match for that day at 5:30 is Union Berlin versus Stuttgart. And on Sunday, April 20th, it is Augsburg versus Frankfurt at 2:30 p.m. and at 4:30 p.m. it is Dortmund versus Mönchengladbach, and at 6:30 the last match for that day is St. Pauli versus Bayer Leverkusen. To wrap up this episode is Ligue 1. On Friday, April 18th, we have Reims hosting Nantes at 7:45 p.m. and on Saturday, April 19th, we have Paris Saint-Germain hosting Le Havre at 4 p.m. and at 6 p.m. it is AS Monaco versus Strasbourg, and the last match for that day will be Marseille versus Montpellier at 8:05 p.m. And on Sunday, April 20th, it is Lille versus Auxerre at 2 p.m. and at 4:15 p.m. Brest will host Lens. At the same time, Nice will host Angers. At the same time, Reims will host Toulouse, and the last match for that day will be Saint-Etienne versus Lyon. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this episode, and please do not forget to like, share, subscribe and comment on all our videos. Thank you.